Hi everyone, welcome to Simble Things, a channel where I talk about living with C-PTSD. Today's video, we're going to talk about the links between physical and mental health, and specifically what having C-PTSD does to your body. So obviously, let's just go basic here. There's a massive link between physical and mental health. You would not feel any pain or anything if it wasn't, for your brain interpreting that. So the divide between physical and mental health is not as much as some people think, but I want to talk about some very specific things that only happen when, well, I'm not sure if they only happen, but mainly happen when you have C-PTSD. Now, I'm going to have to read some of this up off the computer because we're going to get deep into it. So the first study that I looked at was by Christine Heim. She's a PhD professor, I guess, at Emory University in the USA. This was written in June 2009. I just highlighted some bits that I thought would be useful to read, but I'm definitely going to put links down below and I'll put some of it over here. So, in the introduction, Christine says, compelling evidence suggests that childhood trauma is a major risk factor for the development of mood and anxiety disorders, as well as certain medical diseases, including heart disease and disorders such as chronic fatigue and pain syndromes. In adulthood, these disorders often manifest or worsen in relation to acute or chronic life stresses, and importantly, persons with childhood stress experience appear to be sensitized to the adverse effects of subsequent stresses on health. It appears that adverse experience during development induces vulnerability to the effects of stress later in life, and thereby induces risk for developing stress-related disorders. It might have sounded a bit confusing, but what basically saying there that there is a lot of evidence that shows that having trauma as a child is a really big risk factor for getting physical diseases such as heart disease, chronic fatigue, pain syndromes. And not only that, but the childhood trauma makes you hypersensitive to any kind of stress later in life. So, and it says it induces risk for developing stress-related disorders. That's the one bit I'm not sure I'd agree with, because I feel like if you've experienced childhood trauma, you've already got a stress-related disorder. Like, that's happened, and it just ticks up by over time. But yeah, so we go, I think there's another bit I highlighted down here. So the research context. So this goes really deep into it actually, but it talks about how clinical studies conducted in recent years have attempted Clinical studies conducted in recent years have attempted to identify mechanisms that link childhood trauma to adult disease risk. A primary candidate in investigating this link has been the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, HPA, the organism's main stress hormone system. A little bit more, the end product of the HPA axis released from the adrenal gland is the stress hormone cortisol. Cortisol exerts multiple effects on metabolism, behavior, and the immune system that helps the organism adapt to challenge. So this HPA axis is connected to the adrenal gland and how the stress hormone cortisol is released. So we know that people with C-PTSD, our bodies just have an overload of cortisol and adrenaline because we're on guard a lot of the time. I mean, we've had to be, right? So if you've had those childhood traumas, like your body's in alert status all the time, if you're somebody that can never really remember a day when you weren't in fear at some point, or all of it. So all of that builds up in the body. And like I said, the cortisol exerts multiple effects: metabolism, behavior, and the immune system. So that shows why so many people with C-PTSD have digestion issues. There's also a link between digestion issues and anti-immune conditions, as well as this connection between cortisol and the immune system. So there's a lot of very powerful evidence and connections between what happens to us as children and how that affects us physically throughout our life. And for many of us, we wouldn't have even thought about these things or understood about it connecting to our digestion system. So these things mount up over time and just become worse and worse, right? So the conclusion from Christine Heim? Yeah, Christine Heim's paper. In conclusion, results from clinical studies suggest that early stress in humans is associated with long-term neurobiological changes that are comparable to those described in animal studies and suggest sensitization to stress. The implication of these results taken together is that several of the classic features of depression may derive from early stress, reflecting vulnerability to develop depression and likely other disorders in response to challenge. So another paper that I looked at was called Central Effects of Stress Hormones in Health and Disease, Understanding the Protective and Damaging Effects of Stress and Stress Mediators. This is by Bruce S McEwen. And so we'll mainly just look at the abstract here, the kind of summary, let's just call it. It's a kind of summary that comes at the start of the paper, so you can have a read through to see if it's something relevant to what you're looking for. So stress begins in the brain and affects the brain as well as the rest of the body. Acute stress responses promote adaptation and survival via responses of neural, cardiovascular, autonomic, immune and metabolic systems. Chronic stress can promote and exacerbate pathophysiology through the same systems that are dysregulated. Brain regions such as hippocampus, prefrontal cortex and amygdala respond to acute and chronic stress and show changes in morphology and chemistry that are largely reversible if the chronic stress lasts for weeks. However, it is not clear whether prolonged stress for many months or years may have irreversible effects on the brain. This is super important, right? We're talking that parts of the brain, such as the hippocampus, prefrontal cortex, and the amygdala, can be physically changed through chronic stress, trauma, right? When these things happen, our brains are literally different to somebody who hasn't gone through the same thing. And what these changes mean over time, well, we kind of know because we have to live it, right? We're living the results of these physical changes within our brains. The way it says, it is not clear whether the effects are irreversible after these issues go on for, months and years. Now, I would suggest that even if they are reversible, the amount of time it would take to reverse these things fully might be a lifetime's worth, right? It's pretty difficult to think it's going to take less than decades, right? We're talking about changing our biology, and it's not impossible. I don't disagree that I think some of those effects might be reversible, and over time we might be able to change our biology, but I know for sure that is super difficult either way. So let's just cruise on down to some of the bits in the conclusion. Both these studies and both these papers are quite involved, so you want to take some time to read them. There's not tons and tons of research into these areas. There's some, and it's getting better totally, and people are really investigating the links between these kind of physical conditions, mental conditions such as PTSD, and how that affects us, how digestion issues can lead to autoimmune diseases, and how that's linked to C-PTSD. So this is one of the kind of last bits of the conclusion, which I thought was interesting. It says the best solution would seem to be not to rely solely on medications and find ways to change personal behaviors in a positive direction. Motivation, decision-making and perseverance are all functions of the brain. Now that's interesting, right? Because it's just like, oh, well, it almost feels like somebody without C-PTSD is saying, oh, well, you can do it if you really try. And I'm like, sure, we can, over a long period of time, kind of reverse some of the effects on our brain that come from all our traumas and stuff, sure. But, I mean, it almost sounds like you're talking down. Motivation, decision-making and perseverance are all functions of the brain, right? Yeah, so's everything. Mr. what's his name? Bruce McEwen. I appreciate your paper. It's very, very interesting. It's quite deep, yo, but it's really interesting. And I'd recommend like having a read of some of these things. But it's all a function of the brain, dude. Come on now. It's all a function of the brain. In conclusion, like I guess what we have to think about is, how do we deal with our day-to-day when we know that information? Well, one, I guess we can start to think about how our digestion, because, okay, let's skip it back a second. Now, if we're thinking about the body, the gut, I know loads of people say the gut is like the second brain. Oh yeah, the gut's like your second brain. Oh, fuck off. It's not. You know what the gut is? It's really important. It's really fucking super important. But do you know what it is? It's the engine room. And that's where we turn our fuel into energy. And if that isn't happening properly, that causes loads of other problems. Now, when you already have loads of other problems, that gets worse, right? That gets worse. So what you have to do is maybe think about ways to reduce inflammation in the body. There are different things that you can do that. You can investigate that. You can try and go through diets where you start to go through different foods and see what might exacerbate your issues or what might make them less. You know, I've definitely felt that when I have a very low intake of sugar, low intake of like bread, carby kind of foods, I have much better joints. I can get quite arthritic pains in my joints, but that's really exacerbated when I have too much sugar, too much bread, other kind of carby things like that. So, I mean, it might not be the same for you. This is a problem, right? Digestion is all so unique to the person. Super unique, super, super, super unique. So there's some kind of like diets that you can do where you kind of exclude a lot of things and you slowly start to build up like what might be okay and not okay for your system. I think that's really worth doing. And then otherwise, I just start to think about and understand how our brain is predisposed because it's physically different, and how we have to think about we're rewiring our brain. We need to build these new pathways which are more comfortable for the brain to use than the old ones. And that's long, but you can do it. You totally can do it. It's gonna be hard, like everything. We can't just living with our condition, living with C-PTSD is super hard. But what I try to do is, with these videos, help us to make it a bit better day by day, and hopefully that builds up over time. You know, just that little bit of effort can make a difference along with these other things, along with trying to change up your diet, because if you're converting energy in your system better, then that's gonna be better for the way your hormones are working. There are some other herbs that can be used to try and realign your hormone functions. I would look into that. It's been a bit of an awkward video, I guess, because there's a lot of sciencey stuff. It's quite complex, right? The brain's a very complex thing, and our condition is really complex too. So sure, we're trying to navigate it, and we're in a space where there's not loads of research on the matter, but there is some, and I guess by understanding some of that research, it can help us to understand ourselves and our brains, our bodies, and how it's working or not working ideally, and we can start to be realistic about how we make that better. So I know it's hard, but I know you can get better. Day by day, keep trying. Thank you for watching. I hope you like, share, subscribe. I really appreciate any comments. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I really hope you're doing all right today and you can make tomorrow even better. Thanks for watching, everyone.